And today I'm honored to be joined by Lord Monckton of Brenchley. His biography is much too lengthy to do it proper justice here, but suffice it to say he has worn the hat of politician, writer, business consultant, inventor, and served as an advisor to Margaret Thatcher's policy unit in the 1980s. He is an articulate spokesman for skepticism about the perceived threat of anthropogenic climate change. Lord Monckton, thank you very much for joining me today on the Corbett Report.
Well, Mr. Corbett, it's a real pleasure to join you, and let me know how I can help.
All right. Well, I understand that you're on a bit of a whirlwind lecture tour at the moment through the U.S. Where are you today?
I'm in New York today doing a series of interviews, and more of them are coming in all the time, requests from all over the world, in fact. And later on this week, I'll be going on Glenn Beck's Hour. That'll be on Friday between 5 and 6 p.m., and then on Monday next, I'm going down to the Sam Houston racetrack in Texas to address a rally of, I think, around 10,000 people. It's one of these tea parties, which are such a great idea. And I'm going to talk to them, and that'll be the culmination of what has been a 6-week tour right across Canada and the United States.
Well, that is very exciting to hear, and it's exciting to hear that your message is getting out to so many people, because I understand you're making quite a stir in the U.S. right now with your revelations about a new climate change treaty that is due to be signed in Copenhagen this December. So tell us more about this treaty and what is so upsetting about it.
Well, certainly. I mean, when the Committee for Tomorrow, which is at www.cfact.org, kindly got in touch with me and offered to organize this tour, we had no idea of how explosive it was going to be, because while I was on tour, Dr. Willie Soon at Harvard kindly sent me a copy of the first draft of what is going to become the Treaty of Copenhagen. And I mentioned this in speeches right across Canada, and it made national headlines there. I was on national TV, and the national newspapers picked it up. And the same thing, but even more explosively, happened when I went to Minnesota as the first major speech on my U.S. tour, because a local television station recorded a few minutes of the end of my speech and posted it up. This was just 10 days ago on YouTube. And if you type in Monckton video, you can now watch that short clip in which I give warnings about the Treaty of Copenhagen, and more than 1 million people clicked on that YouTube video in its first week, and that is believed to be the first time that any political speech has achieved YouTube platinum in under a week. And now it's getting on for 2 million hits, in fact, are on there. So a quite extraordinary response from the public in the United States. And why? Because this treaty, as I explained during that speech, would take away your constitution and replace it with effectively a communistic world government. And I use the word communistic deliberately because there is no word in the treaty draft of anything to do with election, ballots, votes, democracy. That doesn't figure at all. This treaty is designed under the name, of course, of pretending that there is a problem with the climate. It's aiming to set up a world government that will have the power to control all the world's financial and other markets. So no such thing as a free market anywhere in the world, and it will be able to intervene directly in the economic, taxation, and financial affairs of any nation over the heads of any government, whether elected or otherwise, and to intervene in your environment as well. And I have never seen an attempt by the bureaucrats to grab, effectively by a coup d'etat in secret, so much power in one single treaty document. And they buried it very cleverly. There's 200 pages of the usual UN verbiage, most of it meaningless, most of it impenetrable. Every so often, it becomes clear just for a sentence or two. And those are the bits they really want to pass. So that if somebody turns around later and says, oh, well, we didn't realize we'd signed this, the UN will be able to say, well, look, it's quite plain. In the draft, there it says we're establishing a world government. We're not going to have it elected. We're going to give it power to intervene and to enforce its findings and to make you transfer wealth from the richer countries, and that, of course, the chief target of this treaty is America, to third world countries in so-called reparation for so-called climate debt. Now, all of this just at the time when we know that there is no problem with the climate. It's now been proved by direct measurement that the outgoing radiation that was supposed to be being trapped down here by greenhouse gases is nearly all escaping out to space just as it always used to, which means that the warming effect of CO2 is less than 1/6 of what the UN had thought it was. And even if the UN had been right, which we now know it wasn't about that, it would still take 33 years of having no carbon emissions at all anywhere worldwide to forestall just 1 Fahrenheit degree of warming. So in practice, there's nothing we could do about it anyway. So even though these facts are now known to be the case, Professor Richard Lindzen at MIT has written the paper that brings the scare to an end by replacing all the guesswork of the computer models by straightforward measurement, and a very meticulous and careful measurement it is. That's the end of the scientific debate. There is no longer a climate scare, and yet there is remaining a sort of flywheel effect. So many people have now signed up to the notion that there is a climate problem, that there's a very real danger that unless you, the people of America, can stop this with your love and devotion to your Constitution and your democracy, a very real danger that that treaty will become law, and if it does, that's the end of your Constitution, your democracy, your freedom, and your prosperity.
Well, some very powerful statements, and indeed this is a subject of the utmost gravity, so I hope people will look into it. And I assume when you talk about moments of clarity in the dense verbiage of this UN document, we're talking about things like Article 38 of the draft proposal, which states, "The scheme for the new institutional arrangement under the convention will be based on 3 basic pillars: government, facilitative mechanism, and financial mechanism." So in your own words, what does this treaty mean by these 3 basic pillars?
Right, well done. Government means exactly what it says. It means this is going to be a government. It is going to be a world government. If you look at the very next subparagraph, you'll see the word government appears again. And they put that in quite explicitly. Now, I knew they were going to aim to set up a world government in this treaty. I've known that for a long time because all this was prefigured in the law of the Sea Treaty that dates back 20 years. And Ron Reagan absolutely refused to sign it because he could see the way things were going. But of course, Bill Clinton, of a very different stamp, having no understanding of the value of preserving our Constitution, he signed it. However, the Senate has ever since quite rightly refused to ratify it, and the Senate, I think, will refuse to ratify this treaty too. But the first purpose of it, plainly, is government, and the word is plainly there. Now, the facilitative mechanism, okay, that doesn't seem terribly clear in that little introductory paragraph. You need to read on in the treaty to find out what that means. What that means is that the new government will intervene directly in the economic and environmental affairs of all nations to achieve what are called the climate objectives. And one of these climate objectives, in fact the first of them, is to transfer wealth, to redistribute, that word occurs in the treaty, to redistribute wealth from prosperous countries like America to the poorer countries. Now, of course, you may think, well, that's a wonderful thing, the poor could do with a bit of help. Not a single penny of the money transferred from the pockets of your taxpayers under this treaty will go to the poor. A large proportion of your taxpayers' dollars, which will be preempted by this so-called facilitative mechanism of this government, will go straight into the pockets of the so-called government itself. They will have their private jets and their vast offices in comfortable places like Geneva. They will trot around the world in just the way that the UN's climate panel does now, meeting in ever more exotic locations at your and my expense and running up an enormous carbon footprint. Not that that matters particularly, but that's where a large chunk of the money will go. Much of the remainder, of course, will do what aid of this kind always does do and end up in the Swiss bank accounts of various unpleasant dictators and oligarchs in third world countries whom we should not support, in my view, unless and until they have first become recognizably, properly and stably democratic. And the remainder, what little is left after the world government has creamed off the thick end of it, and then the dictators have taken their cut, will not go to the poor. It will go to building useless defenses against the imagined sea level rise that our climate debt will have caused by our burning fossil fuels. So they say. Now that we know that CO2 has a tiny effect on climate, of course, none of that makes any sense. We haven't caused any damage to the climate, nor are we going to. Our efforts as humans are simply too puny against the vast scale of the climate. We're just not having the effect the UN has said.